Maybe I should start with the statement that the women's movement in the Philippines, at least the two main feminist organizations that were established in the 1980s, were actually, I could say that they were nursed at the bosom of the church. Many of the women who were part of these organizations came out of the social justice tradition of the church, and part of their feminist awakening came about because they were looking at issues of dignity, equality, and participation, and applying these to their own situation as women, both in Philippine society and in a church that is in which the hierarchy, the leadership, is exclusively male. So this women's movement was an ally of the church during the dictatorship, working on issues of social justice and democracy. Many of the documents of the church at that time actually reflect a growing positive view of the women's movement. But things began to kind of fall apart in the late 1980s, after the dictatorship had fallen and we had a post-authoritarian regime, when the church began to lobby against a comprehensive family planning program, which many of the members of the women's movement saw as part of women's rights, the right to control your own fertility. This led to a bitter battle that lasted almost a quarter of a century over the reproductive health law, or the RH law. The RH law was passed in 2012. But before that, another law was passed, which the church also bitterly opposed, the Magna Carta on women, of women. And this is a comprehensive bill for the promotion by the government of gender equality. I guess this is like the gender equality law that Dr. Syamsiyatun was talking about in Indonesia. And this is a law that was enacted in compliance with the UN CEDAW. The church opposed this law, or at least certain segments of the church opposed the law, because one of the things that they asked for was to strike the word gender out of every single provision of the law, because the church does not like the word gender, because it implies that sex is physical, but sex is biological, but gender is cultural, which means that the roles of men and women are interchangeable or constructed or relative in every society. And the church just does not like this, because they see the roles of men and women as essentially different. Women are in charge of the domestic sphere primarily. They can, and this is in some of the papal documents on women, they may participate equally with men in the public sphere, but without prejudice to their responsibilities to the domestic sphere, which are larger than those of men, greater than those of men, because women have a special relationship to children because of their biology, and this is all seen by the church as sacred truth. So any suggestion that women's and men's roles are socially constructed becomes a sensitive topic for the church. But the other reason that the church opposed this was because it was in compliance with the UN CEDAW, which the church, as many of you probably know, had problems with because of reproductive rights. So that the Magna Carta of Women took 10 years to enact from the time that it was first proposed as a bill. Now, I think that the church's opposition to the RH law has had costs to the church because of damage to its political credibility, but the costs to women have yet to be quantified. So we don't know how many teenage pregnancies, abortions, and maternal deaths could have been prevented if contraceptives had been made more accessible to women unprepared for pregnancy in the course of that 25-year period. And even with the passage of the RH law, militantly conservative Catholic opponents, especially those affiliated with Human Life International, can still slow or sabotage its implementation by working with local officials and bureaucrats to obstruct the distribution of contraceptives. And I think one tactic that the most militant are going to try is to try to get certain contraceptives labeled as abortifacient, which would then make them illegal under the Philippine Constitution. For instance, every medical student knows that the pill at a certain dosage becomes an abortifacient, so they're going to try to argue things that way. But I think that this is a minority. I think the majority of the bishops especially are moderate and understand that there are issues more important than contraception, especially since this Pope keep saying that. My impression from speaking with some of them is that they're ready to move on, to stop challenging the RH law, and instead, if they're going to do anything, to quietly promote the Church's preferred method of fertility regulation, which is natural family planning.